All right. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Jennifer Campbell of Utah Domestic Violence Coalition. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the executive director at the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition. I've been there for about 2 years. Prior to that, I've spent the last 11 years working for a domestic violence service provider in West Jordan, and was able to have the opportunity to run shelter and supportive services that were working with survivors, accessing those services. And then a little bit about myself. I have lived in Utah my whole life. I love it here. I love all the snow. Maybe not all at once in 1 year as we've had it, but I love the snow, love the people, love being in the state. My background is, and I have a master's in public administration, kind of with an emphasis in nonprofit management, and enjoy those pieces of this work.
So, for those people who don't know, what is Utah Domestic Violence Coalition?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So essentially, it's a statewide nonprofit working to end domestic violence. In every state, they have federally designated nonprofits that are doing some asset or aspect or form of this work. Some states have a combined domestic violence and sexual assault coalition. Some have them separate. In our state, we happen to have these two, both coalitions. So there's the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, and then Restoring Ancestral Winds, who works with both sexual assault, domestic violence, but more working with Indigenous and tribes. And so all of us are federally funded to do kind of this collective coalition work here. What we work to is to advance survivor safety. We look at offender accountability and treatment, and also like really preventing domestic violence before it happens. Those are kind of the main things that we're working to advance. And we do this through training and education. We work to build statewide partnerships. We advocate with domestic violence service providers, so other organizations that are doing this work. We work with people who've been impacted by domestic violence and other stakeholders. And all of this kind of interaction is really to help inform the work that we do. And so we look at this from that perspective of what are changes as far as policy, what are education opportunities we need, what are training and support, and what are some collaborative partnerships that we can help facilitate and bridge that would work toward these goals of increasing safety, reducing domestic violence homicide, and ensuring everyone has access to services.
You kind of touched on this briefly, but what is the purpose of Utah Domestic Violence Coalition and its mission?
Yeah, so really, our mission is through working through advocacy, collaboration, education, and leadership is to end domestic violence and to ensure that we have increased access to safety for survivors and treatment and support for those who have perpetrated violence as well.
So, taking those missions statements right there, how does advocacy, education, collaboration, leadership help to end domestic violence? Which one do you think is the most important out of those ones, if there is an important one?
Oh, it's like picking your favorite part of the things that you need to do. I would say they're all really collectively important. I'll start with advocacy, not just because it's like not in a certain value, but just because of the importance. And then I'll kind of talk through each one if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
So with advocacy, what we see is it's really important to look at our public policy to see what rules, what laws, what implementation of those are in play, what's working, what may not be working. And our focus in looking through that lens is making sure that policy advances safety and stability for those who experience domestic violence. That's one of the big pieces that we're looking at. And we want to make sure that it improves treatment and accountability for those who may cause harm. And then looking at ways to, as I mentioned before, is ultimately promote the prevention of intimate partner violence before it happens. And so by using that lens, then we really analyze, advocate, look to change policy as it is either formed or what's in play or what may come to ensure that it's meeting those pieces of this work. And so with that, we've been able to see, and I can talk a little bit more later about the changes and things that needed to come through that lens. And then that leads us to collaboration. So we partner, like I mentioned, we have member programs. So we have about 26 member programs. These are mostly nonprofit agencies that are doing some form of work in domestic violence. So we have member programs who have shelter and supportive services. We have member programs who are working with those who offend or those who may cause harm. We're working with organizations who serve the pets of individuals who may need to go into shelter. And so they have a place for those pets to get access and services. And those are just a few of those. And then we work to help ensure that they're having good partnerships with their communities that they're in, that they're working together. One of the pieces particularly to mention is we looked at the lethality assessment protocol that was a national assessment and looked at ways to enhance referral and connection to services from law enforcement to our shelter-based services. And so that's one of the areas where we helped facilitate and bridge bringing that into the state, ensured good access and partnership and proper implementation of that. So that's kind of our collaboration. And education is another piece I think that we mentioned to kind of see what that is. So we offer a 40-hour training to professionals that are new to this work on a quarterly basis. And so kind of the hope with that is that this includes like our member programs, law enforcement, community partners. We work with media, we work with others to look at domestic abuse, to look at the understandings of what it is, the roles that they can play in helping to stop it and to support individuals impacted by it, and ways to intervene that are appropriate. And so, like, for example, last year we trained over about 2,200 individuals across the state that were working in a professional capacity. We also online at our website have a 40-hour training that individuals can sign up and do. So maybe they can't come to our live training that we hold. That's also virtual. But as I mentioned, it's a quarterly process so people can get access to how to correctly work in this field.
Is that a free online 40-hour training? Or
right.
Exactly,
yeah. Okay. So those are those services that we try to offer and get out. Mm-hmm.
Did you mention leadership? Was that the last one?
Yes. And so again, in working with leadership, so some of those pieces are hosting spaces and places for individuals that are really guiding this work. So across the state, we have domestic violence service providers that are serving almost every county that are doing these services. And so naturally in their communities, they're definitely being able to be the leaders in response. And so what we try to do is strengthen that by giving them support, by getting them help. One of the things we do during April, May, and June is we travel across the state and we visit all of our programs that have shelter and supportive services. We host an opportunity to have policymakers come, to have local media come, and to learn about the work they're doing, to see ways that they can engage with that work and help to really support those programs. So, for example, we had a chance to go out to Blanding to one of our programs there, Gentle Iron Hawk, there through the Utah Navajo Health Systems. We were able to have the lieutenant governor come and attend, see the programs, see the services. We had the Department of Public Safety come and train with law enforcement with their agency and see how to refer and work better together and enhance those partnerships. And then we had local leadership as well to navigate that. And so those are ways that we try to strengthen our community leaderships so that they can lead out in this work.
So what resources are available to people who are victims of domestic violence? You mentioned that there's local little areas people can go, different services. But yeah, what types of services are available for victims of domestic violence?
Yeah, so we have a great network of support for individuals who are trying to navigate this. So we have a LINKLine is what we call it. It's a 24-hour confidential hotline. The phone number for that is 1-800-897-LINK or 1-800-897-5465. Anyone can call that who is looking for resources, who's looking for supportive services. Maybe they know someone who's impacted by violence and they don't know what to do. They could call that number. Someone who might be causing harm can call that number and look for resources and services. And so, so we maintain that line. For example, in the last year, we had over 3,000 calls for help and services. Kind of what we see on average is, about 1,000 of those were individuals who were seeking help and supportive services. So that's kind of primarily, but we also see individuals who are looking for access to resources or ways to support and help individuals. So anyone's open to call that. The other on our website as well, we have at udvc.org, we have a resource list and you can go onto our website and see all of the services across the state. Also on our LINKLine, we can refer you locally. That's the big part of what we do to the providers that are nearest to you. But on our website as well, you can go and access, we've got kind of maps, area maps that show you you're in what region, who you could call, the numbers to get a hold of, and how to get help and services. And so we really see ourselves as bridging individuals to resources. We kind of assume that everyone will know how to call and access services. We try to remove that with with our LINKLine to say, anyone can call this information, anyone can call and talk to us, and we're happy to connect you and make sure you get help.
So what type of legislative work are you guys doing? Could you explain that to us a bit?
Yeah. So, kind of how we work as a coalition is we have a public policy committee. Outside of the legislative session, this committee meets monthly. It's an open meeting. You're welcome to reach out to us. You can contact us on our website. Erin Jemison is our public policy director and leads that meeting. We have individuals across the state who are doing various aspects of this work, and organizations attend. We look throughout the year at what priorities and what areas that we're going to focus on. We listen. So again, as I was mentioning, traveling around the state, a big part of that is listening to our programs and hearing what issues or needs that they're impacted by, what laws are working, what laws are not, what don't exist, what need to. And then each year in January, right before the session, we approve a slate of policy that either we're working on or we're supporting, and we'll work on that throughout the session. And so these are really that focus of kind of what I mentioned before when we're looking at ways to strengthen supportive services. We're looking at ways to improve offender treatment for those who may cause harm. And then we're also looking through the lens of prevention. How do we make sure that we're focused on preventing? And so that's kind of how we set these priorities and how we do our work, is it's really informed from the community. And we are always asking people to reach out to us and let us know how they've been impacted and ways that we can help in that.
So moving along there, what are your priorities and how are they determined when you look at the broad scheme of things within the coalition?
Yeah. And so kind of that focus, like I was mentioning, is really looking at the impact. We know that having strong supportive services for individuals is a big priority of our work. And so some of that is saying what areas need to be strengthened and how can we support that as far as a response. Also, another piece of that is looking at those who cause harm. Do we have enough treatment? Do we have enough looking at ways to support for the needs of addressing that issue? And then lastly is, again, looking at that prevention piece, is how do we work collectively as a state to ensure that we're trying to prevent this? That's our hope, really, is that we could prevent this from happening in the first place. And we know that there's a whole range. It's looking at primary, secondary, tertiary, all those different pieces of prevention, and making sure that they're there, that they're funded, and that we can keep working to ensure that people can get access to that.
What are some of the main forms of prevention that you guys advocate for?
Yeah. So one of the first pieces that I feel people should know is that from the state perspective, prevention is kind of very underfunded as we look at this, looking at working with survivors. And so we know that in funding some of the work, and that work is looking at really those intersecting issues. So how do we have healthy relationships? So we have programs that go and teach into schools and in communities that what does healthy relationships look like? That's really important. It's important because our media, our people all around us, they don't often model that piece of what we think is healthy and supportive. Another big piece of prevention is looking at safe communities. How do we increase safety in our schools and in our neighborhoods and in our communities? Because again, we see that correlation as we look at reduction in harm. And another piece of this is including, enhancing community conversations about roles that people play in stopping violence, that we all play a role, whether it's having conversations in your home with your children, it's having conversations in your schools, in your communities, in your churches, in the areas and spaces that you're at. We all can play a role. And so we try to do a lot of an education and helping people recognize that, understanding the dynamics of recognizing what domestic violence is, knowing how to respond to someone who'll come to you, because most often they come to their neighbor, they come to someone they trust first. And so our response is really important. And then how to refer them to appropriate services, a big part of our prevention education as well, is when they know that there's somewhere they can go to get help, we see people connect and we see a reduction in harm and increased safety. But another piece of prevention as well is looking at early childhood education, looking at home visits for families. All of these anchor points set up safer environments in homes and houses, better wage for our working moms, for people who are out in the workforce. Enhance those pieces. Again, we see an increase in a link to increase safety.
a few years ago, I tried to brainstorm all the different media and videos that have like healthy relationships displayed in them. And there's barely any, because healthy relationships don't really make a good movie. If everything's, clearly communicated, there's no drama. And so people see these different TV shows and movies and they, idolize that as what a relationship should be, especially if there's not a lot of functioning relationships around them, even though that might not be like a healthy relationship to begin with.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I know, I have a couple of kids, and when they were little, some of the first things we did is start to name what is unhealthy about this example. Because you're right, like me showing them was not a lot where I could be like, oh, good news. These are all really healthy, safe relationships that just that doesn't a lot of time makes it into a movie. So yeah, we spent a lot of time in our household just saying, what could be different here? What are some red flags that we're seeing in this show that this person should clue into that this is an unhealthy dynamic? And you're right, it's not. It's really hard to find in culturally to hold those examples to. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to start educating and naming it and training to it.
Well, especially a lot of like romance movies teen girls think are like wonderful and so cute. It's like, I think that was harassment and that was, something else. And so it's good if you can take a step back and point those things out. I think especially younger girls and younger guys, because they think they're just trying to be like the movies, and the girls think they want it like the movies, but it's like, that's not healthy. So
I know, and we find with teens too, like one of the big conversations we teach on is you're in a relationship and now what? Like they were just so excited to get into the relationship, right? But they didn't think about the next day. And we're like, what's normal? Is 50 texts from this person normal? Is that healthy? Is that making you feel good? Or is that maybe a little bit like some red flags there about being too obsessive with your location, your actions, all these pieces? And, we really try to help people define what is healthy in their relationship and let them name that. I actually love when, maybe they say, I love when they text me each period or when school starts or whatever. We're like, okay. And then as long as you're feeling in control, you're feeling this dynamic's healthy, but what are some ways that you could not? If you don't feel that that's healthy, is it okay for you to define this? And so defining your relationship, I think, is one of those pieces that sadly are missing out of a lot of these media and the examples we see. We don't see those conversations to say, when you do this, I don't feel comfortable. And I think that's really important for anyone to know, both adults and kids, that it's okay to say that, name it, and agree to it.
A lot of girls too, sorry, this last thing, then I'll go back to my questions.
Oh, you're
I feel
good.
like a lot of girls are always scared, and guys too, that if I say no, if I voice my opinion that I don't like this or I don't like that, then they won't love me anymore, or they're not going to want to be with me anymore, right? And so you have a lot of, I used to teach middle school, so you have a lot of kids that are like, well, if I say no, I don't want to do that, I don't want to send this picture, I don't want to be alone with them, then they're not going to want me, and I'm going to be, I like them, so I'll do what they want me to do. And I think that is a really dangerous mindset for young girls and young guys to have alike. So
yeah, and totally understandable. I mean, those kind of feed on all of our insecurities, right? Is that we do want to be loved. We do want these things. And that's that experimental stage when we're figuring out what that looks like. And so, yeah, I do think it is a definite changed conversation when you can say, but it's still all right for you to define what that looks like. But it's a risk, it's scary. And unfortunately, it's not modeled in a lot of areas. So, and I just love the fact that you're a middle school teacher. Good job. That's such a hard age. They need good people. So thank you.
I did it 1 year, but
that's a good thing.
All right. Sorry, we'll go back to the questions. What were the highlights of the 2023 legislative session that impacted domestic violence survivors?
Yeah, this last legislative session, and I've been, like I mentioned, in this role almost 2 years. And so it was definitely changed in the way we've started talking about domestic violence. It's taken a long time for us to get here. And I luckily get to stand on the shoulders of many great people who come before me in this work and to really start navigating those relationships. But this session had, prior to it starting, had some really horrific homicides and some impacts in our state. And I think people were definitely leaning into what are we doing collectively to stop this? And we saw some great advocacy out of the governor's office. The lieutenant governor had been amazing in really working to message and talk about the needs for supportive services and some changes. And so this session was pretty phenomenal. All of our 4 areas of priority policy were able to pass. And so the first was looking at really getting statewide funding for core services. That was in the governor's budget at $50 million. we were able to see 30 million of those dollars funded. And that was amazing. That was a coordinated effort, and working with Representative Ivory, Representative Johnson were really great in bringing this forward. Like I mentioned, getting support from the governor's office. And then where we see with those programs is we saw about 12 million ongoing and 12.5 one time for victim services across the state. For domestic violence, that was translated to about 3 million ongoing. We also had another request through Representative Johnson, was 3 million more. So that was about 6 million total that came into domestic violence services, as well as kind of seeing this overall increased funding. We saw 3 million for sexual assault services. And then we saw another 3 million for victim service. So for children's justice centers, and then a little bit more for legal services and for areas doing the working for underserved communities as well. So like all of those funds came out of that. It's really helpful. It's really impactful. I try to tell people though, those dollars were making up for loss that we were seeing in our state in federal funds for our programs. And so some people are like, oh, you guys are good. You were able to get these dollars. And I was like, hold on. Those were really looking at a loss we were seeing in funding. And so programs didn't have to shut down. Now, that led us to kind of the second legislation that was really important, HB 244, formed a Utah Victim Services Commission. And that was through Representative Ivory and Senator Kennedy. And so this commission the intent is looking at victim services collectively as a state. Right now, a commission didn't exist that was doing this. It's looking at strategic planning for services. It's looking at how do we create really an opportunity to hear the needs and to work collectively as a state, so that instead of us just acting when we have deficits or when our funding is at its lowest, and then funding is not the only priority here, but it's one of them, we can look and say, what is needed for victim services? What's the cost for services? And how can we ensure, because it is in statute that victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, our children's child abuse should get services and supportive services. So how do we ensure as a state that we're making sure those funds are coming? And so the commission will start in July. It'll look really closely at overall statewide what we need for victim services. It'll have a sub-focus of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, as among others. But also looking at what policy do we need moving forward, the funding resources, and the state kind of infrastructure we need to set up for victim services. Then we had a
lot of work going on.
Yeah, there is a lot going on. We were really excited about those two. And then I can talk about some others if we have time, if you want me to. We were really excited about those two because we want to be really intentional in how we think about this work. And that really involves everyone at the table. It's not just, our victim service providers. It's not just law enforcement. We really want everyone at the table to say, this is the impact we're seeing. There was some great legislation coming through looking at, like data collection as well. So that kind of links to our commission. That's HB 43 that was by Representative Perucci and Senator Escamilla. So that kind of was looking at the expansion of lethality assessments, which I'll talk about as well, but also creating kind of a task force to look at the domestic violence data gaps and access and how we coordinate those issues. Because right now, if you ask me about data in the state, I would say these are kind of our best ideas, but they're outdated, they haven't been funded well, and they're not very coordinated in the collection of data of what's happening. And so that was passed. That's in conjunction with the SB 117, which is domestic violence amendments through Senator Weiler and Representative Wilcox. That was that expansion of lethality assessment across the state so that all law enforcement are administering the same risk assessment and required to connect with community providers so that victims can see that, yes, there is law enforcement, they're victim advocates, all their services, but there's also community support as well if they need it. And so that's been an evidence-based protocol that shows a reduction in homicide and a reduction in severity of violence.
Do you think that there has been an increase of domestic violence or an increase of people standing up and reporting that they have been a victim of domestic violence?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I think that what we're seeing, and it's kind of a nuanced question. So because the data is so spread out and is not as cohesive and collective as it should be, we can say that, look, nationally, we're seeing an increase as well. We're seeing about 1 in 3 women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and about 1 in 4 men. And that was a bit of an increase. At one point, it was 1 in 4 nationally. In the state where I get a little hesitant is it depends on where you look. It depends on what year you look at. There's a little reduction. One thing I can speak well to is, so the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition was administering the lethality assessment that I mentioned, this risk assessment that law enforcement was doing. Last year, we did over 4,585 screens. 80% of those were high danger of individuals. That's half the law enforcement that have implemented this across the state. So only half were using it at that point. That'll shift this year. But what we were seeing is 80% of those at law enforcement stops were showing high increases of danger. And then anecdotally into some of our data, what we're seeing is more people accessing services, which is what we hope for. We want more people to get access to services, but we are seeing an increase. The pandemic ebbed and flowed a little bit for the numbers that we were seeing. And so, when the pandemic or when the numbers were really high, we might see a shortage or like a reduction in people accessing shelter. But then as the numbers would kind of ebb and flow back, you'd see this big increase of all these people who've been kind of waiting and we're in these really high risk situations. And so like I said, I feel like I always hesitate with data. Our intent is that we will start really beginning to name prevalence and having that be a part of the, like we would love to see a dashboard that shows this is exactly where the data. Now the Department of Public Safety does have a great dashboard that's looking at like call outs and police, but it's missing that community provider lens because they don't report up those numbers. So that's where our numbers, I would say, are still needing to be finessed and worked at. But yes, I mean, we are seeing this access and this need.
What else do you want people to know about the coalition?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I always kind of try to let everyone know is that we all play a role in stopping violence. All of us. And so we talked a little bit about this prior, is having, healthy communities, having safe places to be, working in your homes, like ensuring that we talk about ways to stay safe and to be healthy is really important. But, is the coalition, we also see this opportunity for people to donate. And I always say to people, you can donate your time, you can donate your funds, and you can donate to our programs and the people that are doing this work. And so there is a place for everyone. I got started in this work about 14 years ago as a volunteer for a local agency and went in, I sorted donations, I helped clean, I painted a lot of rooms, I did some of those pieces. And that was really valuable to our local programs. They don't have funding to do that. Most don't have a maintenance crew. Most don't have those people. They rely on people coming in. Our programs need donations of clothes. They need donations of, bedding. I got to tell you, garbage cans and paper towels were our favorite donation, or not garbage cans, garbage sacks, the sacks for oh my gosh, those were like gold. We don't know where they would go. And that's not a huge, hopefully that's not huge for people, but that is a big impact. Paper towels were huge as well. Like donating some of these pieces to your local shelter, figuring out who they are or calling us and we'll connect you is really important. We need funding. We're a nonprofit entity. So individual donors help fund a lot of our policy work. It's not something that we get grants for. That's something that we have to fundraise to be able to work on the legislation that I was talking about, to be able to do some of this work is something that we need funds from the community to support that. So we very much appreciate that. And time. We always need individuals who are looking to serve on a board. We love that. We need board members. Our programs need board members. We need volunteers to help answer our LINKLine, our 24-hour hotline. And love to have people reach out. We need people to help in our tabling events and the things that we do throughout the state. So we love all volunteers on that.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the coalition or different things you're working on?
Yeah, we know with the numbers that we're sure that most people who might hear this may know someone who needs help and needs support. And we are there for you all. No one, in our opinion, and what we're trying to say in the state is no one needs to go through this alone. Our belief is that we have supportive individuals, we have agencies, we have a whole network of professionals who are wanting to help. And so if you or someone are navigating an abusive situation, you don't have to do that alone. We're here. Our job is to believe anyone who calls us. We're not a judge. We're not a jury. We're not any of those pieces. Our goal, which I love, is that our whole job is to believe you. And so if you're needing help or supportive services, please reach out. We're here to help you. And we don't want you to have to feel like you have to navigate this alone. There are many people who are there for you day in, day out. Our hotline's a 24-hour hotline. Our programs are 24-hour agencies. And we're here to help you.
Repeat that phone number and website for those people who might need it.
You bet. So like I mentioned, our coalition number is 1-800-897-LINK is the phone number. And then our website is udvc.org is where you can call for help. Or where you can go as well as if you're looking for the website. And then that number one more time is 1-800-897-5465.